Welcome to MILE Webinars, the service provided to you by Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE. Brief about our institute. Our institute is a non-profit institute that aims to build leadership and entrepreneurship excellence in the Middle East and the Islamic world. Our webinar today is latest trends in performance improvement practices. In this webinar, we will present several trends which related to how performance data is used in organizations and what professionals consider important to be changed in order to reach better performance. Our speaker for the day, the presenter is Cristina. Cristina is a director of research programs in the KPI Institute. Good evening, Cristina.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning if you are in the other side of the world and decided to join us. I am excited to be here today in collaboration with our partner, Madinah Institute. As Ahmed just mentioned, I work as head of research programs for the KPI Institute, and also partly I am a performance management consultant. Our organization, the KPI Institute, provides research services, educational programs, and advisory services to organizations which are looking for improving their practices in measuring and managing performance at all of its levels in an organization. If we're talking about monitoring strategy or operations, even if we're discussing about how do we manage employee performance management, we're constantly looking and researching on the best practices, and we try to combine all of the insights that we find from, if you want, from the academic perspective, from the research, with the practitioners' points of view and the practical business solutions that we can provide to organizations. We're not focusing on providing software solutions in this area, because when you say performance management, there are a lot of companies that do technology, come up with a technology to support these visions. We are focusing on developing frameworks which support organizations to better track their KPIs and objectives. The topic that I've proposed for today's webinar relates to latest trends in performance improvement. And these trends are extracted from our latest research that we've done. Among our annual studies, we conduct a study that is purely dedicated to investigating how are organizations working with KPIs and what are their efforts towards improving performance. And I thought this is a good way to start the year. We're still in the first part of the year, so how about we look a bit at what our practices. We've collected data at the end of 2017, and it's a good moment to think about what can we do to make the best of the tools that we have at hand in the next year. In the agenda for today, I've pinpointed several topics for discussion. When we're talking about performance improvement, at least from the perspective of the KPI Institute, we're thinking about everything that relates to action, in the sense that if performance measurement is merely a promise of improvement, right? So simply because you have selected some KPIs, you have objectives, and you have decided what are your KPIs, and you're collecting data for them, it doesn't actually mean that performance will improve. So when we're talking about performance improvement, the first step that you must take is to decide and to actually see how are you using the data that the KPIs provide you in decision making and to optimizing processes and everything within the organization. So this is the first point of discussion. How are KPIs used in decision making and what can be improved in this area? Then very closely connected to this topic, we'll see it's data management, who is handling data and how. The third point relates to KPI alignment and integration. a very often highlighted aspect which relates to how we can actually improve the KPI framework that we're using. And then the last two discussion points, challenges in improving and improvement suggestions. I think that these are highly valuable. Both of them will be discussed from the perspective that we've collected to our survey, to our research. This research, which is aggregated in a report that we'll be launching this month, the state of performance improvement and KPI practice 2017, has been conducted at international level for 2 months. From November up to December last year. So the challenges and both the improvement suggestions come from what we've seen in the market, and of course I've taken the opportunity to provide some recommendations on how we can improve performance. In relation to the recommendations that I will be providing you, I decided to focus on some, let's say, small improvements that can take place with a significant impact on performance. I wanted to put aside significant investments that an organization would require in order to, let's say, elevate its maturity level, and focus this webinar on giving some much more cost-effective tips that can be included into everyday work so that we make the best of the KPIs that we use. And then at the end, Ahmed will take some of the questions, and I'm happy to reply. Okay, everyone. So before we start, actually, I should go back so that I don't show you the insights. Before we start this discussion about KPIs and decision making, I would like to have your opinion on this matter, because what happens in many cases is that within the organization we might have the infrastructure necessarily to collect a lot of data, a lot of information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this information is valuably or usefully used within the company. And I would like to have your honest opinion. If you were to think of yourselves, to what extent do you consider that in your everyday decisions you base that decision on concrete data? So you're not taking assumptions, we're not talking about estimates, or experience, or instincts. How much do you feel that you're actually deciding based on concrete data and information? Because this is the same question that I've asked to our survey respondents, and I'm curious to see if at this audience today we have a different perspective on things. I think you've already found the survey, because I can see it as it shifts in real time. What I can tell you is that the first bar that moved significantly was the one with, to a moderate to a low extent, I feel like I'm actually using data, but things are shifting. Okay, I think it seems a bit stable now. Well, at this point, I think most of you already voted, and oh, it just shifted. Okay, it seems like 30% of you admitted to using to a high extent data, but also 30% say to a moderate to high, also 30% to moderate to a low extent. Or put it the other way around, we only have 10% of professionals here that admit to use to a low extent data in their decision making and make use mostly of their experience, instinct, than concrete information. Well, I think that's quite interesting, but at the same time, it seems to be quite balanced from the other perspectives. I think that in some way, we're all inclined to rely more, especially the more experience that we get, the more we incline to rely on our experience, on our instinct, and especially if sometimes working with data can be burdensome. You cannot have data at the moment that you would like to have it, or you have it in a format that is not user-friendly, and you don't have necessarily a lot of time. You have to decide. So there are a lot of, let's say, impediments that besides our own choice or wish to use more data, makes it a bit harder for us. Now, I would like to share with you what we found from our survey. It seems like 45% of the professionals in our survey admitted to using data to a moderate extent. However, there's quite a significant percentage, 33% of people that rely to a small or very small extent on data. And if I'm taking a look now on our poll, it's a bit in balance. It seems like moderate to high extent is 36%. So most of us are somewhere in between when it comes to data usage. Another aspect that I was interested in seeing is, okay, let's say that 20% of us actually do use data, as in this finding. But to which extent that data or KPI results are analyzed in context and not as isolated events? Because sometimes the danger with data, if you're not using data, there's a danger that you don't have an objective or accurate picture on the business. If you're using data, there's the risk that you might be misled by data, in the sense that if you're not tracking the right set of KPIs, tracking or taking decisions based on one or two results, it might not give you the full picture. So you might take a decision that seems to be perfect for that context, but it has a negative impact in another area of the organization that you were unaware of. So from this perspective, even when we're using data, we need to make sure that it is properly used. And from what I found out, seems like 45%, which is quite a large percentage of organizations or professionals, when they do use results, performance results, they're analyzed in context and not as isolated events. Which on one hand, I think that it's positive, because we have almost half of the people that understand context, and system thinking is key in taking decisions and actions within the organization. If we're thinking about why aren't we more inclined to using data? What stops us from using data? Is it data quality issues? Is it time pressure, competency, habit, data availability? And I have another poll for you. Let's see what you think about this. Can we launch the second poll? In the second poll, I would like to ask you to think which one of these options actually stops you, or it's a constraint in the way that you could maximize the data that you're using. From my experience, I can tell you that one of the most common issues that I've heard is, I don't have the time. So that the time is killing us. We don't have the time either to collect the data, to report it, to look on the data. Let's see how you feel about this. Well, quite two of the most popular items seem to be data quality issues. So 60% of you say that we have problems with the quality of the data, which sometimes makes me question whether it's even worth looking at the data if I don't have the security or the insurance that is soundly collected and reported. And 40% of you say that it's about having the right data availability, and being ready in time, because you don't have the luxury of deciding maybe at the end of the week when we're going to have to report. Thank you very much for being active and answering the survey. What I can tell you is that indeed the two items you've highlighted today are generally applicable. And I would even say that throughout different regions of the world, they're facing this data-related challenges. On one hand, it's about quality, and on the other hand, it's about being ready on time and available. Now, both of these issues are easily fixable, to say so, with a software solution. A software solution to collect data should enable you to have more reliable information, and at the same time, processing is quicker, reports should be done on time. And this is it's a market that it keeps expanding in the past years. It has been growing fast in the last 5 years. According to Gartner, the business intelligence and analytics market was forecasted to grow to $18.3 billion in 2017, and it's still growing for the next 2 years. And this highlights an increasing need for better agility, accessibility to data, and deeper insights. However, what we're going to discuss in terms of suggestions for improvement, besides the issue or besides the idea of acquiring a software solution, there's also other initiatives that we can take to ensure that we have better data quality and more, let's say, more responsiveness in data availability. And it has nothing to do with the software that we're using. It's mostly related to setting some rules and setting some standards of in this process of data collection. To conclude a bit the topic with the KPIs and decision making, I think that the best way is actually to combine these two aspects. Combine data with what we know as managers, because in both options, if I go exclusively on data, I might have issues that relate to being data blinded. And I think you know by now that if a statistician, statistics, it's a science that can both reveal or hide many things. So if someone has the means to influence data, it can do it very easily and mislead us. So in this context, your expertise as a manager will never be and can never be replaced by any software or technology that might appear. I don't believe that this is something that we're going to substitute, but we need to find the right mix between these two. And talking about combining data with managers' expertise, I remember that somewhere in 2002, an article in Harvard Business Review talked about the ecosystem as a company, which recently released at that time an agent-based simulation. Now, agent-based simulation nowadays are not new, they're quite common, and they refer to software solutions that can solve complex business problems with computer simulation. But what is appealing about this agent-based simulation is the fact that it combines these two features. It combines the data itself with specific expertise. This specific expertise is used to define the structure of the simulation, the rules of the game, and it can include typical behavior of people in typical situations that work as rules in the way data is processed. And in the end, the outcomes of the simulations are always discussed by the manager or if you want, the data user and the data scientist. And they discuss and they check if the outcome, if the data resulted, it really indicates that the reality. And by keep on testing and adjusting things, we can find possible solutions by processing large volumes of data in an instant. But then again, these are particularities. It's not like you can use these types of software on a daily basis to help take decisions. Otherwise, we'll be buying these softwares and we will not be hiring or headhunting among the best directors and executives. Other problems frequently related to not using data to a very large extent, it's about habit, competency, time pressure. I've put them together because sometimes I don't have the time. It's quite a common excuse. And there are cases in which if a matter is important, you make time. So I would mostly put on habit than on the time frame itself, this issue. What is important is to make sure that once you have data and once your, let's say, manager executives are open towards integrating this concrete information in the way they take decisions, to make sure that they have the education. And I know that this might sound like now everyone needs to be a statistician in order to know how to work. We are the area of big data is quite popular and quite burdensome for some of us, because we have access to so much information that we don't really know what is important, what is not important, and how to look at it from the best point of view, from the best perspective. It also sounds scary because it gives a feeling that all executives now should take a data literacy training course, which is not actually the case. It's merely our perception. In 2017, University of Washington, which notices this high demand for data literacy among in the working environment, started to analyze a little bit of how can we prepare students so that they have this competency when they get in the workplace. And they try to look into, okay, what is this analytics and business intelligence data that they're using, that companies are using, and how can we prepare students? And what they discovered was that actually 80% of the vast majority of the analytics that we use in business are mostly averages and sums. So you don't have to know advanced mathematics in order to know how to use data. And I think this is an important finding, because it gives us an argument to highlight that understanding data is the responsibility of every executive and every manager. You can be part of a large organization when you have an entire team that handles information, handles data, and provides you with a report. But if your managers, if your executives don't know how to read that data, if they don't know what lies behind those numbers, how those numbers are calculated, then it's very hard for them to establish correlations, to actually understand what happens behind the scene, and take decisions in correlation with reality and with the business. It's very hard for them actually to combine exactly what we said about their expertise, their knowledge, which is invaluable, with what the data tells you. If we were to sum it up in 6 steps, how can I better include data in my decision project, my decision making process? I would say that, first of all, once you have the report with the information that you have, assuming that you have the data that you need, so taking out all the restrictions, the question is, how can I better use it? First of all, we have to think about strategy. The matter that you want to decide upon can be directly related to strategy or not. It can be operational. But even operational, it would have, to some extent, an impact on strategy. It is important to think about, how does this issue that I'm analyzing right now relate to strategy? Because we want to make sure that the entire decisions that we're taking are taking us one step further towards a strategy. I can take a decision at the operational level that makes perfect sense and it fixes the problem. But if it takes, let's say, the department or the company towards a direction that is different from what's our strategic plan, then without noticing on a daily basis, step by step, through small decisions, we are shifting the activity of the department towards something that is not linked to our strategy. So first of all, I'm thinking, how can I link it to strategy? Second of all, we're identifying any potential causes of the problems. And here is where we use data. I might know already what are some, let's say, factors, influential factors, but confirm that with the raw data. Is my assumption confirmed by raw data, or it isn't? And if it isn't, it might indicate a totally different perspective that I haven't thought about it. Markets are so dynamic these days, are changing and what used to be valid 2 or 3 years ago might not apply. And by looking at the numbers, they might pinpoint that for you. The third step can be to identify What additional data can help me understand the problem in more detail? Is there anything in addition that I need and that I'm missing? I might have it or I might not have it. But even if I don't have it as gathered, I can take some feedback in that direction if it doesn't come like a concrete data in the report. Based on all of this information which I'm analyzing, I can find several solutions. The fifth step is to analyze what is the impact of this solution on, let's say, on the operations, because I gave the example with an operational problem. How is this going to impact, how is each option going to impact my operations? How is each option is going to impact my strategy? So we're thinking from small and specific to the large picture. We have to develop system thinking. And then lastly, you choose which one seems to be the best option. And in some cases, it might be that you have to choose something that it doesn't work great for the strategic perspectives, but it's the most feasible and effective thing that you can do in that moment. But if you don't think about this, if you don't have in mind that you need to connect it with strategy, you might be led to taking small decisions every day that take you further and further from strategy, and that creates small and small bottlenecks in other areas of the company. Something that I've mentioned earlier before, when I said you might be in the happy case in which you have a team that is dedicated to working with data and you're basically just the user of the information. In this case, we want to distinguish these two types of entities, KPI owners and data custodians. Or if you want, KPI owners are directors, executive managers, are the ones responsible to reaching the KPI target. They are using the information, the data for decisions. On the other hand, we have the data custodians, who are very smart people who work very well with numbers. So they can generate whatever report you have. They are responsible to ensure data quality. They are responsible to calculate the KPIs and so on. What happens in many cases is that these data custodians have a very technical oriented approach. They might not have the business knowledge, so they cannot read very far beyond the numbers. They cannot convert the numbers into knowledge. And at the opposite end, KPI owners might understand the business very well. They have the knowledge, but they don't manage to, if you want, correlate that knowledge with the concrete numbers. They don't know how those concrete numbers are actually generated. What we have seen in terms of governance of data is more and more corporate performance is handled by a dedicated office or a dedicated person. Then again, this depends on the size of the organization. It appears that 38% of professionals that answer our survey have a dedicated strategy and performance management office, while there is no dedicated department or person to handle performance management in an organization. That listed about 11%. In an organization where performance management is not shaped as a capability itself, performance is basically handled by each director, each department itself, and it comes very naturally to say that performance management is the responsibility of each managerial position, right? To make sure that resources are properly used, to use resources to make the best outcomes. However, we've noticed that when you're having this approach, different departments develop their different ways of working, their different ways of looking at performance, their different tools of handling it, and it creates misalignment, disintegration, and a lot of effort is disseminated in monitoring and reporting performance without much added value. This is why it is important that you could have at least, let's say, one representative that is responsible to make sure that performance management is standardized as a process and it's constantly updated and upgraded to meet the business needs. And in this manner, everyone is using the same types of let's say, tools to report, which means that it's so much easier to provide consolidated data reports. It's so much easier to communicate because we're using the same language. If traditionally the finance department is very accustomed with numbers, we can also mention that sometimes performance management is handled by HR, but of course in the case of employee performance management, and also probably commercial departments which interact a lot with customers, with sales, they also keep a good track of numbers. But then again, each of these areas has their own specific approach, which would be a good idea if we can bring someone to standardize what is happening within the company in this area. Related on how is data managed, well, it seems like data quality is among the top 3 challenges in managing performance. So that might be an issue as well, because if various entities are collecting data and they're doing it in their own way, and sometimes you're going to have multiplication of data. So what is important for me as information might be important for another department as well. But if we're not doing it together, we might collect information on the same matter, but we might have different numbers because we calculate differently. So even data quality can be improved if we standardized our measurement approaches. And since data quality is tightly connected to using a software solution, we can see that around 69% of organizations are still using Microsoft Office. 23% have a customized software solution, 12% have standard software acquisition. Microsoft Excel is probably not going anywhere, and regardless of how fancy the software solution that you've bought is, it will still represent probably the basic instrument used to collect data and upload it into the system. But in the same time, it can lead to let's say more processing, more burdensome processing process in the lack of an automated solution. Next topic that is tightly related to how we can improve performance is the extent to which the KPIs that we're using in the company are aligned and integrated. I will start with presenting a little bit the terms and what do I understand through from alignment versus integration. When I say KPI alignment, I'm thinking about the extent to which the organizational strategy gets to be translated into KPIs at each organizational level. So all the strategic objectives which are reflected into key performance indicators at corporate level are then consolidated, if you want, or cascaded to departmental level, to team level, and eventually to employee level. When I'm talking about KPI integration, I'm thinking about the extent to which KPI measurement is connected to other key processes in the organization. Because in the end, measurement, it might be a tool in different processes, right? We're doing budgeting. Budgeting has been around us for as long as accountancy has been. So from this perspective, budgeting is about numbers, it's about measuring for sure. So how is KPI linked to budgeting? How is KPI linked to quality management? They are very closely tied together. And then it is important to look on, if you have this measurement process, if you have a performance management process, how well is it integrated with other key processes? But let's start step by step, similarly like you would do it in a performance management system implementation. So firstly, you will think about aligning your KPIs, and then in the second stage, you will think about how would this fit in with other processes. From this perspective, we've asked several professionals, and their perception on alignment is that between organizational strategy and departmental strategy, only 21% of them seem that there's a small or very small alignment. 40% have the sense of strong alignment between organizational and departmental strategy. Now, what we can see is that if we compare these percentages with alignment between organizational and employee performance plan, things are different. So from strong alignment at 40%, it comes to 29% when we're talking about strategy versus employee plans. And I would say this is not a surprising finding, since it is much more challenging to ensure this alignment from corporate level to what each individual in the company needs to perform. And I think that if it also depends on how you approach things, because sometimes in terms of alignment, it seems like some organizations prefer to do it bottom up. So they start with setting up KPIs for their employees, and then they go towards strategy. Others prefer to go from strategy down to employee. From my perspective, the best approach is to go from the corporate strategy to employee level, because in this manner you can make sure that you're actually aligning to something that has been defined on the short and long term for the organization as well, such as its strategy. If we're talking about integration, the top 3 most integrated processes with performance measurement are budgeting, quality, and process management. And I would say this is quite expected from the perspective that all of these 3 items or processes have been using measurement ever since its beginning. When I say, what does it mean that my measurement process is integrated with budgeting? For example, since KPI selection should be connected to your strategy, it means that the strategic planning process should take place in correlation with your annual budgeting process. Then again, if we're having a quality management policy, if we're a production company, right, and we have several ISO quality, we have ISO implementations, ISO certifications, so we are highly concerned with quality management in our company. We have a quality management department. Then of course, everything that we select and all the measurement tools and processes that we have should be aligned with what do we do in terms of quality management. Similarly, if we do process management at an advanced level, our KPIs should be connected to strategy as well as to processes. It depends on the level at which you're making the selection and the purpose for which you're making it. What seems to be least integrated is innovation management, risk management, and project management. Now, if with innovation, I can understand that innovation might be something relatively new if we're talking about innovation management in companies. Innovation which has emerged or has gone beyond industries where it was core, such as IT or research and development. But now innovation, we talk about innovation in all of organizations. Risk management and project management are rather older disciplines that should be better integrated with performance management. And this is because I've mentioned earlier, right? If I'm doing strategic planning, I need to do it in correlation with my budgeting, but I also need to do it with my risk management approach, right? How can I shape my strategy if I don't link it to risk management? And then how can I manage risk? I must measure it. So how about I include on my strategy objectives and KPIs, not objective, but KPIs that have the ability to indicate some risks. So we need to take that into consideration as well. And project management, it might be that KPIs are used in project management, especially in industries like software development, industries that are project-based somehow in the way that they're organized. But the question is, how do we connect this project management KPIs used isolated with the KPIs that we use at corporate level to report operational performance and so on. So my advice would be that you consider these processes because they're also important for the organization, and we should rethink about their connection with strategy. We asked professionals to share with us what would they think. It's one of the most common challenges that they have in improving performance. What is mostly difficult for them if we're thinking about improving performance? And they had to rate this difficulty on a scale from 1 to 5, when 5 was very hard and 1 was not at all. And it seems like what is very challenging is to build and nurture a performance culture. And I think this connects tightly to change management. It's very difficult to change the culture of the people, change their habit, and make them be more result-oriented, more accustomed with using KPIs in their activity, even if we're not talking about top management and executives that might be used with this kind of approach, but with regular employees in the company. It also seems to be very challenging to implement performance improvement. So we might decide it's good to take several actions, but implementation comes sometimes difficult, and what I've seen to be lacking is follow-up. So we take some decisions. In best of cases, we even find people to be responsible for them, but somehow they go missing. They go into a shadow as we keep handling all more pressuring and a lot of emergencies, and we never follow up to see, has that improvement been implemented until its end? Has it turned out as we expected? Has it produced the results as we wanted? And the third position is the difficulty of decision making in today's environment, which is so burdened by data. I will take 5 more minutes to discuss about the last point with the improvement suggestions. You have here on the slide, on each slide, I've selected only 4 improvement suggestions. We've aggregated, this was an open question, so we had to aggregate all of the ideas that came from professionals and put them into relevant clusters. And one of the most common issue that arose from this open discussion related to alignment. Organizations are having troubles with aligning their KPIs. And you have here pinpointed some of their suggestions. If they were to improve one thing in the organization at the moment, they would be setting strategies and align KPIs, strategy cascading, development of a performance management system aligned to departmental goals, or linking employee goals to corporate goals. So what I've seen is that in terms of alignment, improvement comes in all areas of in all organizational levels, meaning it's either about linking strategy to operations, either about strategy to employees. It covers all of the organizational aspects, hierarchical levels, such as it should be in the sense of a good practice. So if we want to think about this improvement suggestion, what could we be doing to ensure better alignment? I would take the case of a company that has been tracking some KPIs. Let's say we are doing some monitoring, but we're not sure that we are aligned in what we're tracking. An initiative that you could be doing, and I do challenge you to try it in your organization. I would take the scorecard of all of the departments that we have, let's say the main departments. And I would look, and maybe you don't have a scorecard, but I'm sure that you have a monthly report that you have to make. And I'm sure that in that monthly report that must be done for the CEO, you do highlight the most important results for that department. And you can take that as a sample. And I would take a look to see whether what they are reporting, what all of these functional areas are reporting, are correlated and synchronized in terms of KPI report and in terms of targets established. And to give you an example, if, for example, let's say we're manufacturing cars. And the strategy at corporate level was decided. And in terms of client, the marketing department has this important objective to increase customer satisfaction. And what marketing found out is that related to customer satisfaction, what matters the most for the customer is, let's say, delivered on time. Well, I don't think my example with the car is actually, let's say we're selling something else, whatever you like. And the most important item is that it should be ready on time. In this case, marketing is probably monitoring customer satisfaction. But I want to look at logistics. Let's see logistics, what they're responsible to delivering the product. What are they tracking? They should be for sure tracking on-time delivery or time to deliver. Because if we know that this is important for the customer and it will influence customer satisfaction, we should have alignment, right? If marketing looks for satisfaction and on-time delivery is an important driver, then logistics should keep track of time delivery. Okay, but for logistics to deliver, they need to have the product, right? I need to look in production. Production should be tracking, for example, production cycle time, because if they're not respecting on the cycle time, the on-time delivery cannot be met as well, and so on. My point is that if you were to take these three departments independently and ask them, what do you think is important? Production might be more inclined to say, well, I think it's highly important for us to monitor quality. Good, but if they're focusing on quality and they're not focusing on other aspects that influence the process and they don't have these cross-functional, cross-related KPIs, it will not lead to a satisfied client, which in the end will lead to the profitability targets that we are expecting. So you can do as an exercise, take the scorecards or the performance reports of different departments and look on how the KPIs are reported. Do they make sense? Do they support each other in terms of KPI select and then again of targets, because you can have conflicting targets. You can have, let's say, a delivery target that is not reasonable for the production target that you have in terms of cycle time. And in terms of at employee level, we have to look on whether the KPIs we set for each employee make sense to their everyday activity, because the most common problem here is the fact that they're not really linked. So we set up some objectives and some KPIs for them, and then we realize that on a daily basis they're working on totally different things, and then they don't have the time or the chance to work on improving those KPIs that were indicated in the performance plans. The second improvement suggestion that professionals gave us was automation. Integrate all measurement systems and fully automate it. Use a dedicated software solution for data collection, give priority to automation, introduce a performance management system. I'm not going to go into more details because I've kept mentioning this. Yes, I agree, a software solution can fix a lot of the problems, but what you want to make sure is that you don't, simply because you bought a software solution and it's great, it will not fix your problem with data. It will not fully fix your problem with data being ready over time or any other problems that might appear, because sometimes it's also about, it also relates to people behavior and how we use it. You can have a very good software solution, but if it's not used, people don't understand it, it is useless. But if you were to take the case in which you would like to somehow automate the process and make it easier for people to do it, but you cannot commit to a software solution this year, the first initiative you should take is process streamlining. Process streamlining starts with process mapping. To understand how you can improve a process, and even to automate the process, it needs to be documented. So this idea of process mapping and documentation can indicate all of the process bottlenecks that you have related to measurement and reporting. This will highlight where the issues are and will give you the opportunity to come up with better routing of your processes so that it happens faster, better, and better. The second thing you can do is to standardize. Let's assume that you don't have an automated feature, you only report using Excel, right? So Excel is everything you have. You can still do process mapping and standardization, and streamlining, and you should do standardization. There should be a dedicated data gathering template that everyone uses, so that regardless of the type of report that I'm making, I can easily move and shift data from one part to another. Standardization of the process, standardizations of the tools that they're using. And if you create a clear process in the terms that everyone knows that on the 5th of the month, all KPI data must be gathered, because between the 5th and the 10th, we prepare the report and we have it on the 15th. So once you formalize all of these and you're consistent and you're following up on this process, people get used to it and it becomes part of their habit, of their working approach. But you need to be consistent and have patience, because this is also a cultural change that doesn't happen overnight. The third improvement related to knowledge and skills. If professionals were to improve something, they would provide better basic education about performance management. They will increase awareness. They will increase awareness on the importance of using KPIs. They will train staff who are responsible for corporate performance. But what I've also liked was this idea that they would even provide better education for lower level staff. Sometimes we have the feeling that the KPI-related training courses are for executives, for managerial positions. But if we want to change culture, there is information that should reach lower level staff. And it doesn't mean that we're gonna transform them into, let's say, geniuses or subject matter experts in performance management, but there is information that is valuable for them and that they should have about KPIs, so that we can ensure this cultural shift that we're looking at. And obviously, this is an issue that you can fix it with a training budget. You can go to external training courses like the ones Mile organizes in partnership with the KPI Institute, the Certified KPI Professional. But there are also other internal initiatives that you can take. For example, the KPI Institute offers a lot of free materials, similarly, right, like the webinar we're having right now, or articles on this matter, webinars, research studies, that they can be introduced in an internal library of the company and disseminated so that people get more familiar with this. But you need an internal campaign to develop knowledge and awareness on this matter. Most probably that can be deployed by the HR department. The fourth improvement suggestion was better communication and a shift in culture. Greater transparency, getting employees aware of the company's strategic plan, better communication of strategic planning, communication written in caps to emphasize its importance, and transparency and engagement. What can we do here? We should set up a communication plan. A communication plan should distinguish between what do we communicate related to our performance internally and externally. Externally might be the case for larger, maybe government or state-owned companies, but for most of them, for most of us, internally is definitely included in this plan. We should identify the different categories of stakeholders, because managers should have access to one type of information, operational positions to other stuff, and so on. However, we should set up this plan and we should identify different points throughout the years in which we communicate about our strategy. Then we communicate about our performance results. Then we communicate about the progress of major projects. Then we communicate about the importance of KPIs again. And by having this cycle established from the start, we have a perspective about the frequency of interactions that we have. And well, everything that is planned has a better chance of occurring than not being on anyone's responsibility or list from the beginning. With this, I will close the webinar. I've noted down here some of the ideas that I highlighted on each of these 4 suggestions that were revealed by the study, and I hope that this was a valuable experience for you that you can further share within your companies. And we still have a bit of time for questions. So Ahmed, if we have any questions, I'm happy to take.
Thank you for this presentation, Christina. We have a question from Ahmed Al-Sham. He is asking, I had the KPI training, but still our company is nowhere near to implement and set a KPIs. What can I do?
Well, if you say that you had, okay, let's approach it different. Let's approach it from a general perspective, not from your own, let's say, from your own case. From a general perspective, it is advisable that if you want to make a change in your organization, send more than one person to the training. Now, again, it might be also related to how large your organization is. If we're talking about a company with 10 people, well, yeah, it's okay if it's one person. But my point is that if we want to make a cultural change, we need to have some informal leaders. And I'm referring to them as being informal leaders because they might have a high rank in the company. They might be senior, or they might be, even if they have the managerial position, maybe they're new in the company and they don't necessarily have, if you want, the credibility or the trust of everyone. From this perspective, we would like to have more people from the company that attend the training because, first of all, there is more knowledge. Second of all, there will be more people that can contribute positively to promoting the KPI usage in the company. If there's only one person that keeps bubbling and struggling about it and talks about it, it's going to take a lot more effort to be heard if we had 2 or 3. So this is something that you can consider. If you want to recommend or suggest such training in your companies, you can propose to have more people so that they can they can be a team, first of all, and have a more impact in terms of change management. To take the case in which you don't get approval, you don't get budget, only for one person, my suggestion would be to transmit over internally everything that you have learned. Even part of our certified KPI professional diploma process, to get a diploma, you have to make an in-house presentation. And we don't request it that simply to have to check a box, but we request it because we know it's important, one, for the company to know what was the value of their investment, and secondly, because we know that if you want to change things, you need to get people on your side. So you should have a presentation, or if you want, several presentations and awareness sessions on the importance of using KPIs in the companies and how can we change things. But when you're talking and when you're presenting from a general perspective, people don't tend to hear it. It seems like it's good for someone else, but not usually for us. So you need to be skillful into linking the learnings from the training course to what's happening in the company. So if you know there's a pressuring issue, if you know that something is hurting everyone, or in general terms, everyone doesn't like something and it wants to change it, link KPIs on that problem. Show how KPIs can help you solve a pressuring problem from the company, and then they might be more open to this idea.
We have another question from Zafar Mahmoud. Before we answer, he asked about the offices like in Pakistan. You can go to KPI Institute. Is it right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is it kpiinstitute.org? They can log in and see the original offices and so on.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. He's asking a question. What should be ideal tracking period for KPIs? Is it monthly or 3 months or biannually or annually?
Are you referring about reporting or tracking?
Tracking.
They're slightly different. That's what I asked. First of all, we should distinguish between tracking and reporting. And second of all, we should distinguish between what type of KPIs. Because at strategic level, I would, or let's put it the other way around. In terms of tracking, because firstly you have to track and then to report. In terms of tracking, KPI should be tracked as often as possible. Some KPIs, especially if you have software, can be tracked on a daily basis. For example, if I have a website, right, and I can daily see the website analytics will show me daily how many people log, how much they spend on the website, what is the bounce rate, and so on. I have other KPIs that cannot be tracked that frequent. I can have, for example, customer satisfaction. I'm not going to track it every day or not even every month. It's much more, the length of time it's much larger. So tracking should be done as often as possible, keeping in mind the tools that you have at hand, keeping in mind that it has to be cost effective as well. So it doesn't make sense to send a questionnaire every month to customers because simply I've just said that it has to be as often as possible. So we have to measure between quality of information, necessity, and the cost of having it. But when we're talking about reporting, if you're reporting matters of strategic importance, you can have this strategic meetings probably every quarter. If we're talking about more operational meetings, they should take place every month. If we're talking about team meetings, they should take place every week. It depends on the type of information, the frequency of, if you want, reporting and tracking as well. For example, to have an effective team, every manager should have a weekly meeting with the team to discuss what were the outcomes of the work that we've done, right? Especially in some cases, in some businesses, we're even talking about daily meeting, right? There are salespeople that meet for 10 minutes every day to decide or to look on the targets and what was done, or 10 minutes at the beginning of the day to make sure that everyone's priorities are clear, right? But on a team level, you should have maybe 2 or 3 KPIs that you're looking on a weekly basis. On a monthly basis, you can discuss obviously things that are more general and even for the department. And quarterly, management team, the C-suite can meet with the CEO to discuss how are we progressing on reaching out our strategy for the year.
Okay, that was. We'll take the last questions because the session time is almost over. It's over actually. Zafar is asking, what is the difference between reporting and tracking?
Tracking is the fact that you collect the data. Reporting is when you take the time and you look on the data and you take decisions. Let's see how I can put it. This distinction is more obvious when we're talking at a larger scale organization, because if I'm a smaller organization and I'm the manager and in the same time I'm collecting the data or tracking the data, I'm doing the calculations and I'm reporting it, I understand that in this case you feel like maybe tracking it's a bit similar to reporting, because if I'm tracking the information on a weekly or on a daily basis, inevitably I can spot some variances, and they can actually and I can act upon it, and then I cannot say that it's that much different. But I'm referring to reporting as being the moment in which you have a dedicated meeting to discuss performance results, because otherwise it's great if you have the chance to have access to data as frequent as possible and you react as frequent as possible to it. It doesn't mean that you have to wait for your 1 month meeting in order to take decisions on or take actions. But reporting refers to establishing dedicated meetings and points in time in which you for sure analyze certain data.
There are one more question. Can we take it?
From my part is fine, of course.
It's about Muhammad Yusuf is asking how to align between the employee goals and organizational goals if there are contracting.
If you're using contractor employees or what?
No. If contradicting, it's a contradicting.
If they're contradictive.
Yeah.
Well, they shouldn't. Now, if you're in the position in which you've taken a look at your company strategy and then you took a look on the employee performance plans or performance forms, how you call them, and you see that they are contradicting, I think this is an exclamation point that should highlight a need for a more in-depth analysis, because you don't hire people to do other stuff than what you're planning to do. So from this perspective, every position that you have open in the company should have a role that contributes in that organization for it to fulfill its purpose, its mission, to deliver the end vision that it wants. In terms of how can we bring them, if at certain point we realize that they are contradictory, and this can happen, of course, how can we make sure that they're on the same page? It relates to what I've mentioned when we talked about alignment, the fact that I would recommend and prefer to start from the corporate level to employee level, to start from the top to the bottom to cascade. Because if you did it the other way around and HR, for example, started to put the objectives of the employees, but it had no connection with the strategy because the strategy of the company was not ready at that time, it might be the case that what we set up at employee level, it might be contradictory with the organizational. So this is why, as processes, I would wait for the company to have a clear vision for this year, at least, because on an employee level, we're talking about probably annual goals. So once the company has a strategic plan for this year, I can take the strategic plan. I need to discuss it with each department so that each department sets up their strategy, and then I take the departmental strategy, I discuss it with each employee, and I see how their objectives and KPIs can be aligned to that.
Okay, thank you. If you have any question, we will be answering your question through emails. So please, if you have any question, ask or reply to any of our emails to get your answer back. We'll leave the final words to Cristina to close the session.
Thank you very much for attending. It was a pleasant experience for me today. I wanted to highlight that the findings that I've talked about today can be found much more extended in the version of our latest report to be released by the end of March. And for all of the participants of today, we will provide a free copy of this research report. And I hope you can use it to create buy-in in your company that some things should be improved and should be changed. All the best of performance on behalf of the KPI Institute. And please approach us or Madinah Institute if you have any inquiries related to performance management. We're happy to assist you.